Hello again guys, welcome back, Comic Kid here again, and today we have another run versus run for y'all, and as y'all can see, it is none other than Mark Waid versus Charles Soule on Daredevil. Now, we'll go ahead and just jump right in and get started on Mark Waid. And a lot of people really like what Mark Waid did with Matt Murdock, and for good reason. The past three Daredevil authors that had come before him, between Bendis, Brubaker, and Diggle, those three especially put Matt Murdock through the ringer, and he just kept getting beat down, and it just seemed like he could not catch a break. Mark Waid finally gave him a break, and it was really cool to see this version of the character again. It was a much more light take on Matt Murdock and his supporting cast, and that's not to say that his run was without its darker moments. It is still Daredevil. You expect him to have some problems in life, but it definitely wasn't such a torturous run for the character. And like many other Daredevil authors, Waid did a great job of incorporating Matt Murdock's supporting cast, and especially by giving Foggy cancer, it just really kind of makes Foggy a much more relevant aspect in Matt Murdock's life. And throughout Waid's run, you kind of see Foggy struggle with this, and Matt try to help him however he can, despite the fact that, there's really not much he can do, and so on and so forth. Now, Waid also did a few interesting things with the villains in this aspect, and you really don't see Kingpin too much throughout Mark Waid's run. Now, obviously, if you're gonna name a Daredevil villain, Kingpin is the most important and distinguishable one, and Waid does end his run with a pretty solid Kingpin arc, but you don't see him as heavily as you do in other runs that have come before or after him. And so I do think it was an interesting idea to pull Kingpin out of the spotlight, at least for a little while. And you also see Waid move him from New York to San Francisco, which was also a really interesting choice in my opinion. You see Daredevil kind of need to relearn certain things about the city, and he knows New York like the back of his hand. He'd been in Hell's Kitchen his entire life, and so he knows certain things. And so putting Matt Murdock in a more unfamiliar setting for him was really interesting to see as well. And then one of the other major changes that Mark Waid was by introducing Kirsten McDuffie into Matt Murdock's life. And as the two's relationship develops, Kirsten definitely feels like one of the more solid Daredevil love interests. She's stable, she's her own individual, she doesn't need Matt. It's just really hard not to like Kirsten as a character, and seeing her develop throughout Mark Waid's run I thought was an exceptional treatment of her character as well. So now overall I did really enjoy Mark Waid's run. He did write it before the Marvel Now stuff, but he did transition into it pretty seamlessly, and it all builds on itself. And so even though his run technically ended and started again, it's all basically one run. But it goes into the original Sin stuff and leads all the way up to moving Matt back to New York. And so yeah, I really don't have anything bad to say about Mark Waid's run. It does feel a little repetitive at times, I guess, and I definitely feel like there are certain arcs you can skip, but he did a lot of welcome and new stuff for Matt Murdock that I really kind of wish had stuck around. And I know some people don't like that it was such a lighter take on the character, but honestly, given that everything that had come right before it had been so dark, I definitely think that it's a welcome change. But to kind of transition into Charles Soule's run, Soule definitely brings him back to a more gritty, darker take, and not only in the costume change, but in the overall tone of the series as well. Now, one of the stronger elements of Charles Soule's run is in the lawyer aspect of Matt Murdock's life. Charles Soule himself is actually a lawyer, and so seeing the law elements of Matt Murdock's life take place in Soule's run really just feel that much more authentic, and as a result, intriguing. And I definitely think that's one of the strongest elements that Charles Soule brought to his run on Daredevil. Now, I didn't mention this in my Mark Waid chunk, but he also takes Matt Murdock and makes his identity public. Everyone knows Matt Murdock is Daredevil and so on. Charles Soule kind of puts the genie back in the bottle, so to say, and he does eventually offer a reason for it, but I mean, Waid sets him up to really just kind of run with it, and Soule really kind of doesn't, and that is one thing that I really wish he had explored more of, especially because his secret identity didn't really seem all that necessary in Charles Soule's run. And they make it clear that not everyone knows who Daredevil is still, but I mean, it doesn't really feel like it needs to be that way. At least in my opinion, I feel like Soule could have told the exact same story and just changed a few words around here and there, and still made Matt Murdock's identity public knowledge. So that is something I do wish we had seen a bit more of, at least in Soule's run. Now, aside from being like darker and grittier, Soule still did plenty of new things for Matt Murdock, especially by introducing characters like Blind Spot. And Blind Spot is a pretty recurring character throughout Soule's run, and personally I liked him. I know some people thought that he was very forced. I got what Soule was going for and like the themes he was trying to do there, but I feel like we either needed to see more or less of Blind Spot throughout the run. I liked him, I was glad he was there, but based on how Soule handled him, I do think we could have done for either significantly more or significantly less of him. That's just my thoughts on it. But he did introduce a few new villains as well, and I definitely thought some of them were intriguing, but again, we could have done with a bit more of them. And I know one of the most common complaints about Soule's run is that it is very inconsistent in quality. Some of it is very good, while other parts are just so unnecessary. I wouldn't say I really disliked any point in his run, although I definitely felt like certain bits of it were significantly stronger than others. But I mean, he did make Matt Murdock mayor for a little bit, and the biggest change that is still being felt from Charles Soule's run today is in making Kingpin mayor. And I did think this was a really interesting aspect, especially considering like the Trump presidency and the parallels he kind of draws to that, and so on. And so I was really intrigued by the whole Mayor Fisk aspect. From the arc Mayor Fisk and beyond, I definitely think that was a really clever idea on Soule's part, and you know, it definitely gave him a lot of real-world ties to draw on as well. That said, I do think he could have hammered some of those themes home a bit harder, but I mean, they were still there, and I definitely thought it was a good idea. But even reading like Mayor Fisk stuff in like Spider-Man and seeing other Marvel heroes react to Mayor Fisk has been a really interesting ride, even though Charles Soule hasn't been at the helm of those arcs as well. Now, as far as the ending of Charles Soule's run, he did take on the monumental task of finding a way to kill off Matt Murdock in the Death of Daredevil stuff. And I actually thought he had a really, really solid idea, but he just barely missed the execution, in my opinion at least. To get into some spoilers for those of you who don't know or haven't read it yet, Charles Soule does kill off Daredevil by seeing him get hit by a truck after saving someone from the truck's path. And I really think this was a great idea, just because I would totally believe that Matt Murdock would go out that way just trying to save someone, and not in some like grand fight with Kingpin or Bullseye or whoever. It's totally a believable thing and a believable death for Matt Murdock, but I think, at least in my opinion, that Soule's focus on the theme there was a little misplaced. He kind of tried to make it this long, drawn-out sort of thing where he's still wounded and is trying to continue the fight, and then at the end realizes that he's been imagining everything and that he's still in the hospital bed. And so I think Soule had a really good idea there. It just, he kind of missed the mark, in my opinion. He had such a solid theme that he could have run with, that he didn't really capitalize on, and so I do think he had a really solid idea for the ending. He just kind of missed the mark. And in all honesty, that's really kind of how I feel about the entirety of Charles Soule's run, is that he had really solid ideas and just kind of missed the mark on the execution. And I'm not trying to say that it's bad, but I did definitely prefer Mark Waid's run, and so I just think his run had so much more potential than we saw in its final product, and so there is that. But that is just me as well. And again, I'm not trying to say Soule's run was bad by any means, but I did feel as though Waid's was much stronger. And I do feel as though Chip Zdarsky built off of Soule's run really well, but Soule also left him a pretty good starting point also. Maybe if Waid hadn't made so many drastic changes for Matt Murdock, Soule's run would have had a better starting point, but I mean, I definitely felt as though it had so much potential to be great, and just kind of wasn't. Now, to get into the art for the both of them, Mark Waid worked almost exclusively with Chris Samnee throughout the entirety of his Daredevil run. There were a few occasions when he'd have a guest artist either for like an annual or, you know, just an issue or two here and there, but Chris Samnee almost exclusively did all the art for Mark Waid's Daredevil run. And so the good news is, if you like Chris Samnee on Daredevil, which I don't know why you wouldn't, then you do have a pretty consistent team. Now, Soule did work with several different artists throughout his run, but Phil Noto is probably the most exclusive or most common one that he worked with. And in both runs, I definitely felt like each artist brought their own unique style to Daredevil, and it definitely fit very appropriately with the story that was being told. Chris Samnee does have a bit of like a brighter type of Daredevil illustration, which, you know, obviously fit well with Waid's brighter tone for Matt Murdock. And every artist that worked with Charles Soule on Daredevil, even when it was like a bit of a lighter moment and after he's reestablished in the red suit, I felt like every artist matched Soule's tone just very appropriately. Now, I am a sucker for Chris Samnee as well, and so maybe that's why Waid also wins a little bit of favor for me, but overall I definitely feel as though Waid has the stronger run between the two. But again, that is just me. Be sure to let me know what y'all think of the two runs down in the comments section below. That's about everything I have for you guys today, so thank you so much for watching. Be sure to hit like and subscribe as well, and I will see you guys again real soon.